There's some music I just want to do this to. Thank you, Rob, for that beautiful piece of music. And to the choir and the soloists. So if you've heard me preach even once before, you may know how much I love stories. I think stories make the best theology. And this leaves me with some regret as a Unitarian Universalist because we don't have a book of scripture stories that we return to again and again. We just are not in that kind of deep touch relationship with any particular story. And while I find that to be frustrating, I also see an invitation in it. An invitation to understanding that the stories we need to think deeply about don't just lie in the writings of our ancestors, but also deeply in the living of our lives. So I'm going to share a story with you from my life. In part, it's because of the theology and the realizations and even the big T truths I discovered there. And also a little bit because I've heard from some people in this congregation still don't know me very well. And so I want you to have an invitation to understand kind of the principles and realizations that guide who I am in life as well as in ministry. So the story began really when I was in second grade, because that was the time I began to live alone with my mother. Sort of an interesting fact to begin with, since I have a father and she had a husband who she just never divorced over the next 20 years. And I have 3 older siblings, but starting in second grade, it was just my mother and I living alone in our home. And if you know any children being raised by a single mother, it produces a particular type of bond. You just know there's a mutual codependence with one another. You literally go through life with each other at one side. And my mother had visited here when I was an intern minister, but that was about 12 years ago, and probably most of you, I would doubt any of you would have remembered her, and most of you didn't have the privilege of meeting her. She was a woman who taught me to care deeply about others, how to critically analyze power structures and do critical readings of society, and to also to fiercely know my own power and hopefully know the wisdom of when to manifest it. But my mother also had a mental illness, and the more I grow up, the more I recognized how trauma probably played a big role in how that presented itself. And so her moods could change quickly, and she could be fierce and intense. And so navigating that was also part of my life. When my family dissipated, we also were left in pretty significant poverty. And I saw how hard my mom worked to make it all work out, sometimes working 3 jobs at a time, even though she hadn't worked in decades before this. And maybe because of her mental illness, or maybe because I know in times she was sexually harassed and her bosses would try to sexually exploit her, and then she'd leave that job and money was just tight. So one of the things that I would do, being a partner, is I would collect all the bottles and cans in our small brownstone building and return them to the supermarket for the 5-cent deposit. And I'd use that money and I'd plan out our meals. French toast one night, spaghetti another, cubed meat and onions the third, eggs and bacon, simple things that I knew how to cook. But more, I remember the late nights. My mom would often go out into the world to explore and discover, and she'd come back a little tormented, having experienced loneliness or ostracism or fear. And in the dark rooms on a couch, I would hold her big hand cupped in my little ones, as she would just talk to me and tell me about her day or whatever was running through her thoughts. And I would go, mm-hmm. And in those simple moments of accompaniment and care, all her paranoia would just collapse until we'd find ourselves quiet and comfortably still and go to bed. I got through such moments in part because I had a great sense of my own capacity and a community to support me. My school in particular was a haven, a fresh start to every day, where I can show up and seek for myself what I wanted to learn or express myself freely. And there I met great friends who would literally just welcome me into their families, and their parents would demonstrate a way to live life that I really valued. My mom was greatly understanding of this. And so times I would go off to friends for days at a time, and she would just trust that I was okay. In fact, she'd say, I know you're really good at that. I know you're okay. And she never blamed me for not calling to sometimes say where I was going or say, I really need you at home. But instead, she would create these wonderful events to invite me in, to say, would you like to come do this with me? I have a special thing for you. And it made me realize how much more powerful invitation is than demand, how much more possibility there is in invitation than demand. One time, and I have no idea how she collected this money, but she took me on this weekend trip to DC, and at some point that's less valuable than worship, I'll talk to you about my relationship with the Secret Service. But on that trip, she took me to this fancy French restaurant with these white tablecloths, and the servers go around with the platter and the silver covers on things, and they put it down, they reveal the escargot, and one waiter dropped a cover, which I was like, but she said as we sat there, I brought you here because I want you to know that places like this, where people have money to spend and can do this, they're just people like you. And I want you to know you can come to places like this too. The whole world can be open. I remember that she worked hard for me to learn that. Now, in her fiercer moments, she would go into a rage and would kick me out of the house. This began in 5th grade, and so I got really good and adept at navigating that. I had a system. I kind of had these friends in rotation that I would kind of call and arrange to kind of stay at their place. And I came to know that 3 days was a good breathing period before I returned home. And typically, when I would return home, I would go in and I would kind of move into my room, and I would stay there for a little bit after she returned to kind of let her know I was there without really being right there together and kind of test the waters. And that kind of reestablished things. And so I'd come back and I'd reestablish things, and things would move on like nothing had happened. But there was this one time in 10th grade. There was this one time in 10th grade, beautiful spring day. I'd just come back from my spring track workout, and it had been the 3-day period, and that time in particular, I just really wanted to come home. I was just ready to have space that was mine and to have the peace of solitude. And when I got to my door, I searched my backpack, and I had sworn I had my house keys, but I could not find them in this bag. I mean, in and out and in and out. And I was like, oh my God. And so I went and I sat on these brownstone stoops and started reading a novel. And I was thinking, this is not good, because the only way in is for her to let me in, and that's not how we do this. But I was reading for not that long, for about 20 minutes, immersed in that world, when out of the corner of my eye, I saw her just turn right to go into our building. And I thought, oh my goodness, I almost missed her. Like, I could have just been reading here for ages and not realized that she wasn't home. And so I grabbed my bag and I went up to her. And as I got close, I kind of paused and I said, Mom? And she turned towards me, and her face got so wrinkled and fierce, like she was squeezing it all together, and it got really red from all that squeezing and blood. And I'd never been so terrified of my mother's face. And she looked me dead in the eye, and she said, calling me a name too cruel to repeat. And she spat in my face. And I just literally staggered back and started crying. And the first thought in my head was, how can there be any love in the world when a mother treats her daughter like that? How can there be any love for me in the world when my mother just did that to me? And so I stumbled back to that stone stoop where I had been just moments before, but in a world of a different place. And when I cry like a baby. I mean, as much fluid as possible is the game. And I'm just crying and just in this place of not being able to process for all the world. And then this voice above me says, are you okay? And I look up, and that beautiful sunny day had been replaced by like this cloudy fog. And there was this man above me who was like silhouetted in this fog with this light behind, and I almost swore I could have heard trumpets. And I was like, oh my God, it's an angel. Talk about, for my atheist self, another big shock to my system. Now, my home was not one of great decorum, but I did have a sense of propriety. And there are all these ancient stories of what happens when a stranger comes to your door. And I thought, oh my God, this angel. And so I wiped my face clean and I sat up a little stranger, and all I wanted to do was serve tea. I thought, if only I had a tray and I could pour a tea, that's how you greet an angel. But I move over the best I could do. And this man sits down, and I'm still processing and just trying to breathe. And he's dressed in jeans and this plaid shirt, so like he invented the Brooklyn millennial style before it even became popular. And he looked at me, and I looked at him, and he just said, I know your mother. And I felt this powerful surrender not having to explain my life or why I was there. And I felt so deeply known and understood and accepted. And so I surrendered the notions of how much control I really have, and instead accepted the grace of receiving support. Now, that man did not change my life, right? My dynamic at home was still the same. My friends were still the same. What I was capable of was still the same. But he radically transformed my ability to understand how I was living my life. After him, I knew that while some love may not always be available, there's a larger love in the world offering itself to my imagination. I learned in moments of deep challenge, of course I'm not enough. Of course I'm not enough. But somehow, as a community, we can be enough. And so when I go out and build community, I never think, how much can I accomplish or what can I achieve? I think, what can we do together? And when we're challenged and heartbroken, betrayed, I think, how are we going to be together? My seminary professor of theology, the great Reverend Dr. James Cone, father of Black liberation theology, says real good theology only happens when your back is up against the wall. And when you have no choice, what then must you believe? What then becomes true? Then it's in those moments that I think one develops an authentic faith. You begin to understand what you could put your ultimate confidence or trust in. So, my dear ones, I invite you to excavate the stories of your own lives and to figure out where your moments of gratitude are, where you've been supported past when you were enough. What moments have you discovered a larger love that has held you as your life came crashing down? Or to look for those true experiences in the stories shared with you. May we together be a community of such love and support, a place where we can know and be known by one another. May it be so, and amen.
Our reflection question for the day is, when did someone hold you when you had lost all faith? When did someone hold you when you had lost all faith?